Hello everyone, I'm Jeff Greenewalt. Thank you very much for watching this video about the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, one of the first African American regiments in the United States Army during the American Civil War. One of the great benefits I get from studying history and historical music is that I meet excellent historians. And living in Gettysburg provided many opportunities for me to interact with a number of excellent historians who serve as rangers for Gettysburg National Military Park. And one of those outstanding historians is my good friend John Hoptak. I found out that John was researching the members of the 54th Massachusetts who came from South Central Pennsylvania, and there were quite a number. And thinking that the information he gained from this research fit naturally with the song Give Us a Flag, well, I asked John if he would join me in creating a video, and fortunately for me, John was very anxious to join me, and so this video is the result. I must tell you a little bit about John. He's a lifelong student of American history with a focus on the Civil War. And he earned his bachelor's degree in history from Kutztown University and his master's degree also in history from Lehigh University. He also holds instructional certificates in social studies and citizenship education in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And he's currently employed as a park ranger and park educator at Gettysburg National Military Park, where he's been employed since 2012. Previous to that, John was a park ranger at Antietam National Battlefield. And all told, he's been employed by the National Park Service since 2006. John is also an author. He's written numerous books and articles which have appeared in such publications as America's Civil War Times, and Pennsylvania Heritage. And he also wrote 2 books for the History Press's Civil War Sesquicentennial series, The Battle of South Mountain in 2011, and Confrontation at Gettysburg, A Nation Saved, A Cause Lost in 2012. With me today is one of Gettysburg's finest rangers, John Hoptak, and he's going to join me today to talk about the 54th Massachusetts. So thanks a lot for joining me, John, and why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in the 54th Massachusetts and what piqued you to do all of this research on the members of that regiment?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff, for having me. I always enjoy talking about this topic. As you noted, I work currently at Gettysburg National Military Park, and as long as I can remember, I've been just fascinated with this era in American history, the Civil War era. And my parents brought me to Gettysburg when I was a kid. They would take me to Antietam, they would take me all over, and there was just something about this era that captivated me, that fascinated me. And when I was 11 years old, it was 1989, and that's when the movie Glory came out. And in my estimation, my personal estimation, I think it is the finest Civil War movie made.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that, that's for sure.
And I went to go see Glory in the theaters. Now I'm 11, okay, and the movie's rated R, but my parents, they know my interests, so they took me to see it in the movie theaters. In fact, they took me to see it 7 more times, or a total of 7 times.
Wow.
So, you know, when I saw the film, it just kind of reinforced this, interest in the Civil War. And I began to study the 54th Massachusetts as I got older. And one of the things I think Glory does a tremendous job in depicting, the raw realities of this aspect of the war. But there are some things that, some critics have pointed out about the film that are not necessarily accurate, and some are minor. The direction of the attack on Battery Wagner, was from south to north, not from north to south.
Okay.
It mentioned that Battery Wagner was never taken, but in fact it was in September. But I think one of the more significant criticisms of the movie is that the only actual soldier from the 54th Massachusetts to be depicted on film was Colonel Shaw, portrayed by Matthew Broderick.
Right.
Everyone else is a made-up character. I think that kind of does a disservice to the actual soldiers of the 54th Massachusetts. So there are, 6 main characters. You have Colonel Shaw, of course, and Major Forbes, portrayed by Cary Elwes. And the others were, John Rollins was Morgan Freeman, and Silas Tripp was Denzel Washington. Andre Brower portrayed Thomas Searles, and Jimmy Kennedy portrayed Jupiter, and of those 4 leading African American soldiers, 3 had been formerly enslaved, and I think the movie kind of gives the impression that this regiment was composed largely of those who had been formerly enslaved, when in fact it was primarily raised by free African American men of the North. So we don't have precise numbers. There could have been as many as 250 perhaps enslaved persons who had once been enslaved in the regiment, but mainly it was composed of black men from across the North, from northern states. And believe it or not, when the 54th Mass marched off to war in May of 1863, there were only 133 men from Massachusetts in the 54th Mass. There were about 150 from Ohio. There were well more than 100 from New York. And there were 300 plus from Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Now, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I grew up in coal country, Pennsylvania. And, my hometown regiments are the 96th Pennsylvania 6th Corps Unit, the 48th Pennsylvania. Those were the fellows who dug the tunnel at Petersburg. But I discovered that there were 2 soldiers from Schuylkill County who served in the 54th Massachusetts.
Oh, that's interesting.
And began to dive deep into the regimental records. And, coming to work at Gettysburg, I began to look within a 45-mile radius of Gettysburg. So places like Mercersburg, Chambersburg, Shippensburg, Columbia, Pennsylvania to the east of us, Harrisburg, Carlisle, and looking through the regimental records, there were at least 124 soldiers in the 54th Mass from South Central PA.
Never realized it was that high.
Yeah, I mean, that's more than one entire company. And many of these men would serve in companies I and K. They're the final 2 companies to be recruited, and they came largely from the area around Mercersburg. Which is, about 40 miles or so south and west of Gettysburg. So you dive deep into these stories and you begin to get a picture of who they were as human beings before joining the ranks of the 54th Massachusetts. So I really, when I study the Civil War, I try to get beyond the tactics and the strategies, and I try to approach it from the soldiers on the ground and how they experienced this thing and what they would have experienced. My early interest in the war, reinforced by the movie Glory, and has led me into kind of just diving deep into the records, and I always get to enjoy to tell the story of these soldiers. Whenever I get an opportunity to travel, I go to local graveyards, cemeteries in Chambersburg, Mercersburg, Columbia. There are a number of 54th Massachusetts soldiers interred in these local graveyards there. So interesting story, and the more you get to know them, the more fascinating it becomes.
Now, are there any buried in the Lincoln Cemetery here in Gettysburg?
To my knowledge, no.
No.
In Gettysburg, on the western edge of town, is the Sons of Goodwill Cemetery, oftentimes called the Lincoln Cemetery. From Adams County, Gettysburg was and is the seat of government for Adams County. And within the 54th Mass, I was able to find 4 soldiers who claimed Adams County as either home or the place of their birth, including 2 men from Gettysburg. And James T. Russell from Company H and B. Harvey Williams. I believe the records say Gettysburg. They just forgot to cross the T's.
I see.
So I believe that those 2 men did claim Gettysburg to be their place of birth, even though Williams, he enlisted from Chester County. So I mentioned that over 300 soldiers of the 54th Mass came from Pennsylvania. Most of them came from around Philadelphia. So the second in command of the 54th, and actually the person who led the regiment longer than anybody else, was Ned Hallowell. So we know the story of Shaw. He was a captain in the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry. His parents are committed abolitionists. His level of sentiment, is not as deep and profound as his parents, but Governor Andrew wanted Shaw to take command of the regiment. He also reached into the 20th Massachusetts, the Harvard Regiment, and Ned Hallowell was an officer in that. And Hallowell is indeed a committed abolitionist. So he accepted Governor Andrew's commission, and he went to Philadelphia, his home area, and he began to actively recruit. From there, from Philadelphia, from Chester County, Westchester area, a good number of men for the 54th. And I don't know, sadly, I don't know if anybody came to this part of southern Pennsylvania. There is a newspaper account, I believe, from Greencastle or Mercersburg that talk about a, quote, colored sergeant who was recruiting in the area. That could have been a sergeant by the name of Henry Steward from Michigan, who was a recruiter for the 54th Mass. It may have been him who traveled here. But, word spread, newspaper articles, print, articles about the recruitment of black soldiers. And, in Company I of the 54th were 4 brothers, the Christie brothers from Mercersburg. In Company K are 4 brothers, the Crunkleton brothers from Mercersburg. And I think one of the more telling things is the Crunkletons, they leave home in May of 1863. The Christies, they leave home in May of 1863. 1 month later, who's passing right through Mercersburg but the Confederate Army?
Wow. Yeah.
So in June of 1863 is the campaign that would culminate at Gettysburg. Confederate Army has made its way into south central PA, moving north through Franklin County. And as we know, Confederate soldiers are actively pursuing, kidnapping black men, women, and children from Pennsylvania and taken south to be sold into slavery. So I oftentimes think about, when these men who left Mercersburg, who left Franklin County, who left Shippensburg and all to go north to Massachusetts, when they find out what's happening in their hometown, and they were not here, to help protect their families. They're hundreds of miles away, and certainly their families were affected. They were affected by this Confederate invasion through south central PA. But within a matter of days, July 16th, the 54th gets its, quote, baptism by fire at James Island. 2 days later is that forlorn assault depicted in glory on Battery Wagner. And 3 of the 4 Crunkletons are either killed or wounded within those 48 hours. And one was killed, Cyrus Crunkleton. And I think actually the other 3 may have been wounded. And they were taken to Beaufort, to General Hospital number 6. And there are a number of nurses who are helping to take care of these men in the aftermath of Battery Wagner. And according to Dr. Esther Hill Hoggs, whose diary has been published, she talked to one of the Crunkletons who was lying there wounded. And apparently he told her, he said, now listen, we were ready to go when this war began. And as soon as we got the call from Governor Andrew, his quote was, hardly anybody who could carry a musket stayed home.
Wow.
We were all willing to go off and serve. So it tells you about their level of commitment to rid the country of slavery and forever put an end to the fear that African Americans had living so close to that Mason-Dixon line. And of course that's exacerbated when the Confederate Army passed through their home area in June and July of '63. So I apologize. I keep talking.
No. This is fascinating stuff. That's really interesting stuff.
You look at the record. You find out, of these 124 men, they're young. I think the average age is about 24. About half of them, in fact, I think exactly half of them listed laborer as their occupation. Another 25 or so listed farmer. So there are some skilled trades represented, but mostly it's manual laborer as for occupation. And because they're young, most of these men are not married. In fact, I think only about 30 left a wife and maybe some children behind when they enlisted. So, they're young men, they're manual laborers, they're farm laborers. mostly single. They go off to Massachusetts. They leave home. I think the oldest was 48. He was a cook from Harrisburg. The youngest was Joseph Christie, was 16 years old.
Wow.
And there's 17-year-old Franklin Green, I think also from Mercersburg, who would go off and fight. And you look at the battle record. Now, another thing about Glory is it tells part of the story. It tells part of the story of Shaw. It tells part of the story of the 54th Mass. And it ends with the attack on Battery Wagner. But we have to remember that attack on Wagner took place very early into the career, if you will, of the 54th.
Sure.
You know, so they're an active military unit. They're an active regiment for 26 months. Most of the time, they're commanded by Ned Hallowell. And yes, indeed, they served well at Wagner. They led that assault, but they would serve elsewhere. They would fight at Olustee in Florida in 1864. Yeah. They fought at Honey Hill, Boykin's Mill. So they are engaged in other combat and some other significant battle action. And I always like to tell a story of Olustee in the 54th because from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, there are at least maybe 35 to 40 young black men who would enlist in USCT units, not the 54th Mass, but United States Colored Troops regiments. And at the foot of Cemetery Hill lived Sophia Devon and her sons and daughters. Sophia Devon was born enslaved in Frederick County, Maryland, moves to Gettysburg after her husband purchased her freedom for $200, and they settled on a 4-acre farmstead right at the foot of Cemetery Hill, and her home is caught between the lines.
Sure.
And if you're familiar with Gettysburg, this is just about where the I think the Gettysburg Toy Soldier Shop is today. The intersection of Steinwehr and Tawnytown. They leave their home and they come back, and the story of the Devons is told very well by Andrew Dalton. He wrote an article. He's the director of the Adams County Historical Society. So I recommend to you to read this article about the family. But Fleming Devon is 18, and he enlisted in the 8th USCT in November of 63. Okay, so Abraham Lincoln came to town, delivered the Gettysburg Address. That's November 19th of 1863. That same month, this young man who lived right at the foot of the hill on which Lincoln spoke, and the home's no longer there, of course. He and his brother would go off to enlist. He served with the 8th USCT, and they are in battle for the first time at Olustee. And unfortunately, Fleming Devon is killed in action at Olustee. But the 54th Mass was there also. So the 54th Mass would be brought into the fight to help cover the retreat of Truman Seymour's federal force. But there was young Fleming Devon from Gettysburg with the 8th USCT killed in action. So there are so many stories.
There are quite a few. I recall seeing Charles Parker's grave in the National Cemetery. Was another one of those who was in the Battle of Olustee.
That's right. So Charles Parker, Henry Gooden are two African-American veterans, Civil War veterans, laid to rest there in the Gettysburg National Cemetery. Every single one, every single soldier of the Civil War has a story to tell. And I was able to access the records of the 54th Mass by way of Fold 3, which is an online database. And they have the regimental records there, so you can go through page by page. And, in many cases, they're pension records. So some of these men who survived wounds, lives are never the same. There was a young man, I think he was maybe 30 years old, struck in the head at the foot of Battery Wagner, and he was from Carlisle. And it fractured his skull, and the doctor wrote that he was, overly sensitive for the rest of his life to direct rays of sunlight. Constant headaches. Going home to that. A lot of these soldiers developing illness while in service that would claim their lives in their 50s and so on. The Civil War ended in 1865, but, their Civil Wars continued, for the rest of their lives. So these men, they serve. I believe of the 124, and forgive me, Jeff, but of the 124 men from South Central PA who served in the 54th Mass, I believe over 50 became casualties of battle.
Wow.
That's killed and wounded. So there were, I believe, 8 men killed at Battery Wagner, July 18th. There were dozens more wounded, including Thomas Burgess. He was from Mercersburg also. And he later said that he distinctly remembered seeing Colonel Shaw fall, and that he went over to try to, remove him from the fighting. But he said when he got there, it was, quote, it was apparent there was no life left in him. And he said he tried to remove the body from the ramparts, but by that point, 2 other men had fallen on top of Colonel Shaw, and he began to make his way back out.
Jeez, what a story.
And there's so many stories. And, my wife and daughter, whenever we travel, we go to these cemeteries.
Sure.
And we look at the names, and then I try to find out more about them. So 2 of the Crunkleton brothers make it back home. They're buried locally. One is in Mercersburg, one is in Chambersburg. One of the Christie brothers is in Mercersburg, laid to rest there. William Little. He was a butcher in Chambersburg. After the war, he returned home. Raised a family. I believe he had 8 children, and he became the first African-American policeman in Chambersburg.
Wow,
history.
that's interesting.
And I was really heartened to see those hometown hero banners that you oftentimes see in Chambersburg. They had one of William Little.
Wow.
Just recently placed, I believe, by the VFW Post. So, and he's laid to rest at the Mount Lebanon Cemetery, I believe, in Chambersburg as well. So,
Wow. Yeah, those are amazing stories. Well, John, thanks so much for coming over and sharing all those stories with us.
You're welcome, Jeff. And I know you're going to be transitioning now and talking about "Raise That Flag," that song. And just to help lead you there, people often ask, "Well, what's your favorite scene in Glory? What's your favorite part?" And for me personally, it is the parade in Boston. So that scene that depicts the 54th Mass in uniform marching down what is supposed to be Beacon Street in Boston. Actually filmed in Savannah, Georgia.
Okay. Well.
But that scene, I think, is very powerful. Yeah. And I think it's the song that the band is playing is the "Raise That Flag."
Yeah.
And then it transitions into one of James Horner's, very powerful orchestral pieces.
Right.
Called "Worth a Life" is the name, and it's just that transition away, and you see the faces of these soldiers, looking at the people who are encouraging them, waving them goodbye, and this is a real thing. It happened on May 28th of 1863. The 54th departs from Boston. There's a massive parade, and they march right by the Shaw House. So I think that scene is a transitional scene. Not only that song with the fanfare, the marching band, then it transitions into that more somber tune by Horner.
Okay.
And I think it also kind of reflects the transition from training the regiment and now going off to war.
Right.
And of course, that would be the last time many of these men saw their families and all that. So.
It would be. Wow. Inspirational stories for sure. Thanks so much for sharing all of those,
My
John.
pleasure, Jeff. Thank you for having me. And I apologize if I kept talking.
No problem.
I really enjoy telling the story of these 54th Massachusetts men from Pennsylvania. And my boss at work is a native of Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah.
And he's always proud of his state.
Oh, sure, he
but
is.
I'm a native of Pennsylvania, so I'm always proud of my state,
there
too.
You go.
So we like to go back and forth.
Okay. Sounds great.
Well, what better way to commemorate the determination and bravery of these amazing soldiers of the 54th Massachusetts than to present their song. We don't know who wrote the lyrics to this song, although it mentions Company A, so it was probably written by a member of that company. But what I find particularly interesting is that the lyrics of this song were set to the tune from an earlier Civil War song called "Hoist Up the Flag," written by Billy Holmes. And from my research, I know that "Hoist Up the Flag," well, it was a Unionist song, but it was calling for the Union to be restored the way it was, meaning with slavery intact. And I find that rather ironic, given that it became "Give Us a Flag," which was very much an abolitionist tune and touted the bravery and determination of these African American soldiers, and to a large extent claimed their right to fight for their country. Well, I hope you enjoy my rendition of Give Us a Flag. And by the way, the pictures of the soldiers you will see while the song plays are members of the 54th Massachusetts. Thanks to the Massachusetts Historical Society for preserving and making these pictures available. To support me and allow me to provide more content, please click on subscribe. And if you like the video, please click on like. Thanks.
Oh, Fremont, he told us when the war had first begun how to save the Union and the way it could be done. But Kentucky fought so hard and old AP had his fears till all hope was lost but the colored volunteers. Oh, give us a flag so free without a slave. We'll fight to defend it as our fathers did so brave. Our gallant company, yea, will make the rebels dance, and we'll stand by the Union if we only have a chance. Now McClellan went to Richmond with 200,000 brave. He said, hold back the colored and the Union I will save. Little Mackey's had his way, but the Union's still in tears. Now they call for the help of the colored volunteers. Oh, give us a flag so free without a slave. We'll fight to defend it as our fathers did so brave. Our gallant company, yea, will make the rebels dance, and we'll stand by the Union if we only have a chance. Well, Jeff Davis says he'll hang us if we dare to meet him armed. That's a very big thing, but we are not at all alarmed. For first he has to catch us before his way is clear, and that would be his problem with the colored volunteers. Oh, give us a flag so free without a slave. We'll fight to defend it as our fathers did so brave. Our gallant company, yea, will make those rebels dance, and we'll stand by the Union if we only have a chance. Well, rally, boys, rally now, never mind the past. You've had a hard road to travel, but your day is coming fast. For God is with the right, we have no need to fear. The Union shall be saved by the colored volunteers. Oh, give us a flag so free without a slave. We'll fight to defend it as our fathers did so brave. Our gallant company, yea, will make those rebels dance, and we'll stand by the Union if we only have a chance.
Thank you very much for watching this video. I can't thank John Hoptak enough for joining me and lending his incredible expertise to this video. And I certainly can't thank the members of the 54th Massachusetts and all the other members of the United States colored troops who fought in the Civil War. It's impossible to thank them enough. They faced so many hardships, including discrimination from people on their own Union side, intense hatred from the Confederates that even included death threats if they were captured. And yet they volunteered to defend a country to preserve its ideals in spite of its history of denying them the basic rights of human beings.